All right, folks, I have been joined by Shaun King. Shaun, I do want to go down the line and introduce all the things that you do, but I don't think I'm capable of doing that. Man, first of all, thanks so much for joining us. Would you just tell everybody about yourself? I know everyone knows you, but I want to humor me and introduce yourself to the audience.
Yeah, no, man, I'm glad to be on here with you, and I love your work and love the show and the contribution that it's making just to the ecosystem. And I see more and more people are using what you do as their primary source for news. And yeah, so I'm thankful for what you're doing. But you know, people ask me all the time, and I actually love to answer it because, like, when I wake up in the morning, I see myself first as a father. You know, I have 5 kids, and the world I'm learning sees me one way, but you know, over the course of the day, I see myself first and foremost as a dad. And I've been a dad my entire adult life. My wife and I got married when we were in college. Wow. I'm 36 now, but we've had kids since we were 20. And so everything I do, I kind of do from the lens of being a father. You know, we have kids in preschool, elementary school, middle school, and high school. And I think about them when I do what I do, you know, and you know, for a living. yeah, you know, for a living, I'm not a dad. You know, I work full time for New York Daily News, and I'm the senior justice writer there. And I write 2 articles a day, 5 days a week. And just like you were constantly on the grind, I feel like there's so much injustice in the world that even though I write hundreds of articles a year, I only scratch the surface with some of it. And so, you know, I'm a father, I'm a husband, I'm a writer, and I've always been involved with issues that matter. And while now we're focusing so much on kind of domestic issues, I have a huge heart for injustice all over the world, and have always tried to be an advocate for people who were being wronged in some way or another.
Right on, man. And listen, as you were talking, you know, we've been on, I've been on this particular journey just for about a year, but it's been a long year. And as you were talking, it took me back to something that I wanted to thank you for. And I know in a sense that you may have felt like you were just doing your job, but when my friend Corey Jones was killed, all it took was this one message, and you really elevated his story. And I can't thank you enough because, you know, I talked to you that morning, that Monday morning after Sunday night. I talked to you Monday morning about 7 in the morning. And by 11 o'clock, you had that story out with New York Daily News. And you really helped set the tone nationwide for how people saw my friend Corey. And you knew him through me. So I just want to take a moment and tell you, thank you for that. But then there's so many other stories that you have to deal with like that on a regular basis.
Yeah, you know, I'm honored. I'm honored to do that. And, you know, I feel like New York Daily News has given me an opportunity to choose what I write about. And I have no real filter. I mean, I have editors who correct my stories for errors and stuff like that. But when they hired me, I mean, they really openly said, you pick the stories, you pick the tone. And so every day I'm writing about stories that I feel like otherwise might slip through the cracks, that might not be told from the perspective of the victim. And New York Daily News has given me an opportunity. I mean, I call white supremacy out every single day. I mean, I don't even know if white supremacy was being printed in New York Daily News until they hired me. But I mean, they allow me to call it for what it is, and so I appreciate the opportunity. But it gives me some peace as well, because I try to connect with as many of these families who are affected by injustice, and sometimes they know, and this angers me, but they know that sometimes the best they can do is at least have their story told. And I try to tell it in a way that's tilted toward them and not tilted toward the people who victimize them. And that's the way your local media does it, and local media does it all around the country. They're fed these stories by police and prosecutors, and they tell it from that angle. And so I try to tell these stories from the perspective of family and of the victims.
Yeah. And that was such a huge contribution to so many other stories. Like, I mean, you've been on the beat for a very long time, bringing light to a lot of stories that I honestly believe that if you hadn't put your voice on it, or put your amplification on it, they would not have been heard, at least not in the manner that they were heard. Right? We maybe we would have got around to it. Maybe some of the other people with large platforms would have got around to it. But it's like you're relentless. You know, I was talking to my friend Yvette Carnell about you, and she was like, one thing about Shaun stays on it. He's not going to stop. He's going to address justice and injustice no matter what. And that type of tenacity is something that that really has elevated the police violence, the injustices across the country. And I'm not just blowing smoke. I'm really talking about my personal experience. If you had not elevated Corey Jones's story on that day, they could have written an entirely different narrative about him, other than the reality
Absolutely.
that the family knew him as.
And yeah, absolutely, man. And when I saw it, and when you reached out to me that morning, I feel like I knew him. Like, I was a pastor for almost 15 years. I worked every week, week in and week out, with church musicians and drummers and keyboardists. And so when you told me about him, like, I feel like I knew this guy. I know every church musician I ever hired. Yeah. They were doing gigs on Friday nights and gigs on Saturday night, and loading their equipment into their car. And they're entrepreneurs, and loading their equipment into their car, working late into the night on Saturday night / Sunday morning, and still showing up and serving the church on Sunday. And I knew right away that was who Corey was. And then I found out he was related to a Morehouse brother that I went to school with. And actually, when I was a student at Morehouse, our quarterback, he and our quarterback were cousins. And the world is small, man, and that's what social media does. Right. And there is a window, like, they say if somebody in your family is ever kidnapped, they say it's almost smarter to hire a publicist than it is to hire an investigator. Because getting the word out means everything. And it's the same way with injustice, man. Like, there's a small window for me and you and everybody who loves justice for us to define the narrative. And if we don't do it, somebody else is going to do it for us. And before we know it, they're going to say Corey was a thug, Corey was a gangster, Corey had drugs, Corey. I mean, no telling, they could have said anything. Right. And we had to get ahead of that and say, nah. You killed an amazing dude. Yeah. And that shaped it. And even though justice still has not been had in that case yet, it has shaped the local narrative and caused his name to at least be familiar to a lot of other people. And I tell you, I am troubled though, because and you may have seen me tweet this, man. I've spoken at colleges all over the country over the past few months. And I asked a question rhetorically back in February to students. I said, how many of you can tell me the name of one police brutality victim from 2016? Wow. And nobody could name a person. And so I started asking it at every college that I spoke at. And even I spoke at a college last week. Nobody can name one police brutality victim, but it's still going on, man. I mean, we've had hundreds of people shot and killed by police this year, and the media has toned it down. Yeah. And for a lot of really complicated reasons, some activists have also shifted away from talking about the real cases of police brutality, and it's doing those families a disservice. And I have those families reach out to me on a regular basis and ask me, like, why is nobody talking about my loved one? And they expected people to do for their loved one what we did for Freddie Gray or what we did for Sandra Bland. And in a way, it seems like, and I could be wrong, but it feels like that wave has passed. And there are a lot of reasons why that is, but I'm concerned about it for sure.
That's something. And maybe on another show, we'll talk about some of those complicated reasons. Yeah. But I feel you on that. It's definitely, and I'm wondering how much the election is playing the elections across the country, but the presidential election, of course, is just really sucking the oxygen out of the room in terms of cases. And you know what? It's that's really tragic, man. I find myself not knowing where to start in terms of the names. Like there's so many. And it's just heartbreaking to know that some of those names have already, or a lot of those names have already been forgotten. But
I think people are exhausted too. I'm sorry, man. I think people are beat down too, man. 2015, not one police officer was convicted in all of 2015, in spite of 1,100 killings. And I think the injustice wore people down in ways that none of us quite saw coming. Mm-hmm. And I think we're kind of on the other. I think you're right. I think the presidential election was part of that. And I think some of it was just psychological exhaustion from that constant stream, man.
Yeah. It does wear you down. It chips away at your soul a little bit, just case by case by case. 2015 was an overwhelming year in general. And I can imagine for, just me even getting on the air talking about it was exhausting. But guys who have to live it and write it and just kind of carry the burden of maintaining a narrative nationally. I know that had to be exhausting for you as well. Let me shift to let me shift the conversation.
Sure, man.
Take us somewhere else. You mentioned that you were a preacher for 15 years. I'm sure most people have already figured this out about me, but so I come from the church as well, right? I used to be a preacher back in the day. I want to ask you, what do you think it is